Good afternoon. Welcome to the fifth and final webinar of our 2024 Ask an Expert series. If you missed any of our earlier sessions and you'd like to review them, all of our webinars are recorded and posted to the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation's website. My name is Tika Newton. I'm the International Watershed Coordinator, and I am joining you from here in my home in Kenora, Ontario, in Treaty 3 territory. I work for the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation and the International Joint Commission, along with many other partners around the watershed. Today's webinar is going to introduce us to a couple of cool projects that are happening on Rainy Lake that are helping us to better understand where lake whitefish and walleye spawn and live throughout their life cycles. Before we get started, though, I want to take care of a few brief housekeeping points, as always. If you're new to the Ask an Expert webinar series, welcome. This series is our opportunity for those of us who work on watershed issues to share our work with the wider world, and for those of you in the audience to ask us questions. As I mentioned, we'll be recording today's webinar so that we can rebroadcast it on the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation's website. If you're new to Zoom or you haven't used it in a while, on a computer you can access the taskbar by scrolling to the bottom of the page. There you're going to find a control menu with a bunch of different buttons that allow you to control your audio settings. You can choose whether you want to use your computer speakers or a headset. Everyone is muted as they come into the session today, and if you want to speak later on when it's time for the Q&A, I can unmute you if you just ask me to do that. You can also ask questions by typing them into the chat. You can use the raise hand or reactions button to raise your hand to ask a question, or you can type it into the Q&A feature as well. If you're using a mobile app, you can access the Zoom controls by tapping anywhere on the active screen, and then the taskbar will pop up at the bottom of your screen. You can swipe right or left to turn off the video feed and control your audio settings as well. As I mentioned, if you have a question at any time, type it into the Q&A or the chat, or you can raise your hand. But we will let the speakers finish their presentations before we open it up for questions. I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on all those different chat methods and make sure that you are able to get your questions answered later in the webinar. Do be aware that if you type something into the chat, I will see it, regardless of whether it's a private conversation you're having with another participant or with everyone. I will still see it as the host. So just be aware of that. Okay, I'm going to now introduce the folks who are joining us for today's webinar. We have with us Ben Erb, who is a graduate student in the lab of Dr. Andrew Hafs at Bemidji State University. Andrew started his studies in January 2024, and he's focused on walleye and lake whitefish performance indicators, which he will discuss in the webinar today. As of today, he has worked with the Minnesota DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, the U.S. National Park Service, and Environment and Climate Change Canada to complete one field season of walleye and lake whitefish egg sampling for this project. Ben has also graduated from Bemidji State University with his bachelor's degree in aquatic biology in 2019. His supervisor, Andrew, is also with us. He's a professor of aquatic biology in the Department of Biology at Bemidji State University. Andrew's here to answer questions as needed. He won't really be presenting, though, otherwise. So thanks for being here. Similarly, in support capacities, we have Ryan Mackey and Phil Talmadge joining us. Ryan is the manager of the aquatic ecology program at Voyageurs National Park, where his team conducts water quality, mercury, and amphibian monitoring and analyzes the impacts of aquatic invasive species and assesses how water level management affects the park's aquatic ecosystem. Ryan has been working on lake level management issues in Rainy Lake of the Woods since arriving at Voyageurs National Park in 2004. Ryan was also the inaugural U.S. co-chair of the Adaptive Management Committee for the International Rainy Lake of the Woods Watershed Board from 2020 to 2023. So he's a key contact that the team is working with in Rainy Lake. And then Phil Talmadge is the area fisheries supervisor with the Division of Fish and Wildlife for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And Phil is based in International Falls. Since 2023, Phil has been the U.S. co-chair for the Adaptive Management Committee. And then finally, Marianne Bachand is with us. You'll have heard Marianne on an earlier webinar on November 13th when we talked about bathymetry studies on the lower Rainy River. Marianne is the project coordinator for the hydrodynamic and hydraulic section of the National Hydrological Services at Environment and Climate Change Canada. That is such a mouthful. She earned her PhD in plant biology from the Université Laval in 2013, where she studied the resilience of boreal forests to deer overpopulation. But then after completing her PhD, she transitioned to ecohydraulic modeling during her postdoc work at ECCC. Since then, Dr. Bachand has developed numerous habitat models, including a wetland model that was used to evaluate the 2000 rule curves of the Rainy Lake and Namakan Reservoir system. Since 2016, she's expanded her efforts to create habitat and wetland models for various transboundary water bodies, including the Lac Champlain-Richelieu River Basin, the St. Mary's River, the St. Lawrence River, and Lake Ontario. These models are instrumental in managing water levels and assessing the impacts of climate change and evaluating flood mitigation strategies. In 2023, she returned back to the Rainy River region, where she's working to enhance the models that were developed during the rule curve study. So she's going to start us off today by giving an overview of what that model is and how it is used to assess the performance of Lake Whitefish and Walleye in this system where the International Joint Commission's Watershed Board is managing the water levels and flows. And then she's going to hand it over to Ben to talk to us about the work that he's doing to validate that model. It's a really cool couple of projects that weave together, and it's really exciting to hear from you guys today. So I'm going to hand it over to Marianne now, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Tika, for that introduction. I'll to share my screen with you people. There.
There we go. We did have this working earlier. So. All right, great.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to go back even virtually to Rainy Lake and Namakan Reservoir. So I'm happy today to introduce you to the work that was done by our team in Quebec City to model the spawning habitat of 2 fish species.
Marianne,
so, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You have it on the presenter view. You might want to switch. I don't know if you need to switch it.
Give me a sec. This way?
That's
better?
The right way. Better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tika. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about 2 models that was developed during the 2000 rule curve study. More than that was developed, but today we're going to focus on walleye and lake whitefish, because working in collaboration with Bachman and Andrew, we now have the possibility to validate and improve that work. So today I'm going to try to explain you briefly about the modeling we have done 10 years ago. So I'm going to explain the integrated framework and the physics model we have to represent the habitat of different species. And I'm going to present you how we model the spawning habitat of walleye and lake whitefish during the study, and what we expect to do in the future years. So our team in Quebec City is called the Hydrodynamic and Ecohydraulic Section. We are specialized in integrated modeling. So during the last rule curve study, we developed a system called the Integrated Ecosystem Response Model. We have developed 2 systems during the study, one for the Rainy River, but today we're going to focus on the one we have developed for Rainy Lake and Namakan Reservoir. So the RIM is used to compare the benefit and the drawback of any wall curve or any water management plan. And it does that by integrating several layers of information. So the REIM include a digital elevation model at high density. It's coupled with water level time series and a wave model. And all of those layers add up, and we have a grid with a point every 20 meters. And at every of those points that is covering the lake, we can calculate from 1950 to 2012 and now to 2024. We can calculate dozens of physical variables, such as water depth at a specific moment, wave action, so the energy that the wave action has at the bottom of the lake. So it can, for example, clean the substrate. We can calculate various hydro period variables. So for example, the time during a growing season that a node is flooded. We have the slope, the bottom slope, the light at the bottom. So we have all of those layers that are collection of information. And having those layers, we can link them. We can link the physical variable to biological observation to develop performance indicator. So during the 2000 wall curve, we have developed about 15 performance indicators, such as wetlands, wild rice, and spawning habitat for walleye, northern pike, and lake whitefish. So right now, like I said, in the past, we had that model from 1950 to 2012. And since then, we are updating the variable up to 2024. So how do we use the different environmental variable that we are producing? So let's say, for example, that you have a survey of a specific species. So you have dots of observation with a date. And for us, it doesn't matter if it's recent or if it was in 1972. If we have the coordinate with the date, we can back calculate any physical variable and link it to an observation. We use statistical models, such as logistic regression, Bayesian model, or even artificial intelligence to link the physical variable to the observation. And then for different scenario, we can run a time series, or we can run it specially to compare a scenario. So how do we develop the model for the walleye, and why did we choose walleye as a performance indicator in the study? It's because it's an emblematic and cultural fishery of the region. At that time, they observe a decline of the population, and the fact that the spawning occurs around freshet where the roll curve can change something. If you change the roll curve, you can have an influence on the freshet. So we thought it was a perfect performance indicator. So when we develop a performance indicator, we always try to find the period that is critical when you're changing the water level or water flow. So for walleye, we chose spawning and larva drift. And for every year from 1950 to 2012, we needed it to determine when spawning was occurring. So we use a water temperature time series that was linked to our air temperature. And we established that the spawning was starting 5 days after the temperature was over 2 degrees for 5 consecutive days. So, and every year you have a different period, which is normal. So at that time, we have observation from Dr. Peppenfuss that went on the field in 2012. We have around 140 observation of walleye eggs. So we calculated and interpolate the physical and biological data at those observation points, but also at random point chosen elsewhere in the system. And we have done those comparison for an iteration of 1,000 times, because 140 observation is not a lot. We use logistic regression to link the different physical variable to the observation. So we use at that time water depth during the spawning and incubation period, bottom slope and bottom curvature. And we tested different wave action variable to establish what is structuring the spawning habitat of walleye. In the model, we add a supplementary condition to represent the survival of the eggs. So is it possible for the eggs through time to survive the water level variation? So we put a condition of water depth and of wave action during the spawning season. Having those equations and those conditions, we run that equation for every year at every node for every scenario. So at that time, we run it for the 1970 roll curve, the 2000 roll curve, the state of nature, and for the measured time series. So the model that was selected shown us that walleye spawn in shallow water and steep concave slope. And the spawning habitat is more available during a spring with lighter wave action that was preceded by a fall with stronger wave action. So it means that you find good spawning ground for walleye when you have a huge differential between spring and fall in terms of wave action. So you need a spring where wave action is not too high in the spring, but you had strong wind the fall before, and that wind in fall is cleaning the substrate, the cobble, and it's create good spawning ground for walleye. So when you're looking at those circles, when it's giving you the frequency, not the frequency, so the direction and the intensity of winds. And I've shown you on the right what looks like a good year when you have a lot of spawning habitat. So 2003 was a good year compared to a year where we have low surface area available for spawning. So you can see that you have a switch in wind direction, but also in intensity. So at that time, like I said, we have those observations. So we compare the 140 point coming from Dr. Pabenfus and with the prediction of the model. So the prediction of the model is in green, and those little X were the observations. So we were kind of confident that where we are present, we are calling a potential habitat. It's actually where we saw the eggs. It's normal that you see more habitat than actual observation because the model is not capturing biological interaction, for example, competition or predation. So we then apply the time series for the equation for different time series. Like I said, here I have put you the results when we look at the measures or the observed water level time series, if you want. So you have the years on the x-axis and you have the surface area suitable for spawning and egg survival for Rainy and Namakan Reservoir. The blue line, it's when we implemented the 2000 roll curve. So you see that in Rainy Lake, the mean surface area of suitable habitat has remained relatively stable under the 2000 roll curve. But in Namakan, the surface increased and become more stable under the 2000 roll curve. Okay, I have more results and more simulation, but I think we are more interested today to hear about what we are doing on the field also. So I will move to what we have done for Lake Whitefish. So again, why Lake Whitefish is a relevant performance indicator. So it's a key species. It's an historical fishery. It's also an indigenous fishery. We also observe a decline in population. Contrary to the walleye, it's a fall spawner, and spawning success can be impacted by drawdown that we particularly observe in Namakan Reservoir under the 1970 and 2000 roll curve. Again, we have establish the critical period for every year also for that species. We use a similar approach, but with different temperature, and we apply those calculation in fall. So for lake whitefish, it's really hard to have actual biological observation. So at the time I went fishing with two different fishermen, and to hear about where are their favorite spot. I will show you, we found the diary of a fisherman, and we were able to, like I said, retro-localize where we catch the fish in the past during the spawning period. So we have a mention of Lake Whitefish from 1983 to 2015. So it was giving us around 135 presence point. We use a similar approach than walleye, using this various physical model developed in the REIM. Also, we use a logistic regression and add supplementary condition to evaluate egg survival. And we ran those equations at all nodes for every year of the different water level time series. So the best model was indicating us that lake whitefish spawn in shallow and gentle bottom slope. The spawning success is better when water is clear. It means where we have accumulated wave energy high enough to clean the substrate, like for walleye, but not during the egg incubation, because those species are really vulnerable to wave action when the eggs are underground. So, like I said, to obtain the observation, I was able to meet with Alan Bushnell and go fish with him, and also with William Janelle. And Mr. Bushnell took notes from 1983 to 2015 of every day he went fishing. He was measuring fish. He was noting where he was going, and visiting him and have lunch with his wife. We just put X on maps of where was their favorite spot. We went also to look at those spots and characterize them. So Mr. Bushnell, I think, need to be called now Dr. Bushnell, because he has a PhD in biology without knowing him. So he had so much information. I had to understand every abbreviation, but it was a wonderful database. So we link those notes from those two fishermen to the physical variable. And then we project the model, and here you have the absence and presence for the year 1995, and in green you have where the model is calling for a suitable habitat for lake whitefish spawning. So again, we have run it for several water level time series. Here you have it for the measure time series. So in rainy, the mean surface of suitable habitat has remained relatively stable with the implementation of the 2000 wall curve. And in Namakan, the surface increased significantly after the implementation of the 2000 wall curve. When I don't have the result for you on that slide, but the 1970 wall curve was reducing the egg survival probability in Namakan Reservoir by a lot. So now that we have those models for 10 years in our computer, what are we doing with it? So the integrated ecosystem response model is now in the process of being migrated to a more to a more accessible and open source system. It's called the integrated socioeconomic and environmental system. So we are improving the code so that it can be running faster and that it's easier to share. We are updating the different time series. So like I said, we stopped in 2012 during the 2000 wall curve. We are now trying to update it until now, and we are trying to evaluate the 2000 wall curve. And we are trying to gather new biological data where it's possible. So I think it's where Ben and Andrew are coming to help us. And we hope with what you will see after that, that we will be able to validate the model that we developed during the first study, and also maybe improve it and include other mechanisms. So I just want to tell you that, so I'm the face presenting those models today, but I'm not alone. I have a big team in Quebec City, but we also have so much collaborator. We were not able to find all of them and to list all of them, but I wanted to highlight that today. So that's it for me. So thank you, merci, and miigwech.
Thanks, Marianne. Okay, we're going to hand it over to Ben now to talk about
Perfect.
the field work.
Alrighty, thank you, Tika and Marianne. That was awesome. I'll share my screen with you guys here. Okay. So walleye and whitefish egg sampling on the Rainy Namakan system. This will be an overview of what I've been up to over the last several months here, sampling for walleye and lake whitefish eggs. As Marianne pointed out, the objectives of this study is to validate the model that was provided to us by ECCC and expand upon the existing model. I'll start with our walleye egg sampling that we did this spring. We selected our sites based on a heat map that was provided by Marianne and her crew. The heat map was developed using a raster of ones and zeros, where 1 would equal a suitable spawning site for that year, and 0 would equal not a suitable spawning site for that year. So the green and yellow area on the heat map that I have on the screen here would equal an area that has a lot of ones. So lots of years that conditions were good for spawning for that site. And then the dark blue or absent would be low numbers of ones, high numbers of zeros, and then the light blue would be somewhere in between. All of the sites that I selected, I approved with project collaborators being ECCC, the National Park Service, Minnesota DNR, and Ontario MNR. And I selected 15 sites in Ontario and 15 sites in Minnesota, as far north as Reef Point in the North Arm of Rainy Lake there, and as far south as the Rabbit River in the mouth of Black Bay. The procedure we used, each site we had a Secchi disc reading recorded, and vegetation and substrate were quickly classified at each site. And we took 4 samples at each site at depths of 25, 50, 75, and 100 centimeters of water. This was done by disturbing the sediment with the heel of a boot to suspend the eggs into the water column, which were then captured using a scap net. These are the same methods used by Pappenfuss back in 2012. The picture I have on this slide here is directly after disturbing the sediment with the heel of the boot, so you can see how the eggs just suspended in the water column there, and we were able to capture them with a scap net. And also, just to help visualize that, here's an example of the scap net we used. That's a 12-inch round frame and 250 micrometer mesh with 500 walleye eggs in it that were all sampled from Reef Point, which I have highlighted on the right there at the top of the picture. That was far and away our most productive site. I'll get more into that in a little bit here, but just like I said, to help kind of visualize how our procedure went. Our top producing sites, like I said, Reef Point at the very top there. And then those 3 right in a row in the middle of the screen was Black Point. We had 2 sites on Lichen Island, and then our top producing American site was on Big American Island near the mouth of Black Bay. So to get into our results a little bit here, we had 19 of 30 sites produce at least 1 egg. We had a total of 1,662 eggs over the course of our study period. Our sampling period began at 3.8 degrees Celsius water temperature and then concluded at 13.1 degrees Celsius. So on this figure here on my y-axis, I have our total egg count, and then on our x-axis, I have our degrees Celsius in increments of 2. And you can see where that egg density peaked. It was between 5 and 7.5 degrees Celsius. Here is our egg count versus temperature for split up between US and Canada. You can see on that Canadian graph how our egg count goes up to 800, and on our US graph, it goes up to 60 eggs. That Reef Point site I mentioned earlier had far and away our highest counts of eggs, and we sampled them on an every other day basis. And here on the Canadian graph, you can see at 5 degrees Celsius, we had over 500 eggs. The next day we were in Minnesota, and when we came back to Canada, we had temperatures of 7.2 degrees Celsius, which explains that gap between 5 and 7 there. So peak spawning occurred between May 3rd and May 6th at water temperatures of 5.3 and 7.5 degrees Celsius. And again, here's just showing US versus Canada, again, with the y-axis on Canada up to 700 and the y-axis with the US going up to 70. Depths. So like I mentioned earlier, we took samples at 25, 50, and 75. Sorry, yeah, 25, 70, 25, 50, 75, and 100 centimeters of water. Sorry about that. Far and away, the 25 centimeter depths produce the most eggs. 85.3% of our eggs were taken at 25 centimeters, with a pretty sharp drop down to samples taken at 50 centimeters with 224 total eggs, and then hardly any at all at 75 and 100 centimeters of eggs, with just 1.3% between those two depths. I'll get into our whitefish egg sampling now. We just finished up with this a couple weeks ago, so I don't have as much results. I'm still finalizing the results, but we did 30 sites again between Ontario and Minnesota. The walleye egg sampling just took place on Rainy Lake, and the whitefish sampling took place on Rainy Lake and then Kabetogama and Namakan. So I split up the sites a little bit differently. I did 12 in Rainy Lake in Ontario, and then 18 in Minnesota, spread between Kabetogama and Namakan. Because whitefish are broadcast spawners and they spawn over a little deeper water than walleyes, the scap netting method that we use for walleyes would not be effective for whitefish. So we use egg mats, which were constructed from hog hair furnace filters and attached to cinder blocks. In these pictures here, you can just see how I have that put together. It's a really fibrous material that when the whitefish spawn over, the eggs will just kind of get tangled up in those fibers there. One sample was taken at each site with targeted depths between 2 and 4.5 meters. Eggs were manually extracted from mats using a tweezers. We never got hundreds of eggs in a sample like we did with walleyes. So it made just extracting them with tweezers a really viable option for sampling. You can see in this photo here, in the kind of the center of the picture, there is a whitefish egg, kind of showing just how that gets tangled up in the fibers of the egg mats there. Our sampling began on October 15th when water temperatures dropped to 12 degrees Celsius and concluded on November 23rd when water temps hit 3 degrees Celsius. One of the big concerns with this field sampling season is differentiating between whitefish and Cisco eggs, because they spawn around the same time and over similar habitat. Metric we used was egg diameter, and if a egg was over 3 millimeters in diameter, that was our cutoff for whitefish, and 2.7 millimeters and below was a Cisco egg, and anything in between there we'll have genetically confirmed. And here's an example of that. Our Cisco egg on the left was 2.1 millimeters, and the whitefish egg on the right at 3.4 millimeters. So a pretty noticeable difference between the two species. Our early results for lake whitefish sampling, we have 9 out of our 30 sites produced at least 1 egg. They first appeared on November 8th at 7.9 degrees Celsius and were present each day through the end of the sampling period at water temps colder than that, and we ended at 3 degrees Celsius. So here in this photo, I just have the 2 sites on Rainy Lake that we were able to get eggs at, and then we got the area between Kabetogama and Namakan produced all of our whitefish eggs. The peak egg density occurred on November 18th, with 16 eggs sampled at 6 sites and water temps between 5.9 and 7.2 at sites that produced eggs. Our sampling methods might be altered between now and fall of 2025 to increase egg capture rates. But over the winter here, 2024 and 2025, I'll finish processing our fall whitefish data And then a big part is going to be comparing the predictive model provided by Marianne and her crew to the data that we collected in the spring and fall to validate those sites, and then genetically confirm walleye and whitefish eggs, and continue to share and receive input from project collaborators, and develop a sampling protocol for next spring and fall for walleye and whitefish. And with that, I'd like to say thank you again to ECCC, the National Park Service, and the DNR, and the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. And with that, I'd thank you all again for joining, and I'd like to open it up for questions and discussions.
Thanks, Ben. So yeah, now it's time for questions. If you have a question, go ahead, raise your hand. I can unmute you, or you can type something in the Q&A or into the chat. We have all three of those options available. Marianne, maybe we can start with you. Do you have any reflections based on hearing Ben's presentation right now about what are you thinking? Yeah,
but I'm pretty excited by the results. And I'm also happy that we are finding eggs. I was worried that maybe we don't even find some. We can share our biggest concern, and I think Benjamin will be better than me, but it was a pretty warm beginning of the winter. So Lake Whitefish spawn in really cold water. So I will let Benjamin explain what happened to him. But yeah, I was worried that we will not even have data the first year for Lake Whitefish. But yeah, just the first result of walleye are promising from our side. We didn't do analysis, but just, looking where we find it and what the model is saying, we are happy with what we see, but I cannot show anything for now.
And yeah, like you mentioned, it was a very warm later half of October. We started right when the water temps hit 12 degrees Celsius. And then they pretty much stayed there for the entirety of October. And we got our first egg on November 8th. So that warm weather definitely provided some challenges, but we were out there until November 23rd when there was air temps were below freezing and water temps were just above.
But I already see with just the temperature you have captured that maybe we can do some tweaking.
Yeah, so we started seeing eggs at 7.9 degrees Celsius on November 8th, which is about 46 degrees Fahrenheit. And then every time we were out after that, we got at least one egg.
Right.
I was really struck by your disparity in egg numbers between Canada and the US for walleye. Did you expect that?
No, I didn't expect that. A lot of that has to do with one site at Reef Point that we had 2 days where one day it provided over 400 eggs and the next day it provided 500, which was a lot. We didn't see any numbers like that in Minnesota, but I would say a lot of the rest of the sites between Minnesota and Canada were pretty similar.
Interesting. Can you account at all for that? Like, why is Reef Point so juicy for walleye to spawn?
I'm not 100% sure right now. I can tell you from being out there, Reef Point was just this long cobbly beach full of like fist-sized rocks, which is pretty perfect for walleye spawning.
Cool. That's great. I see Audrey's comment in the chat here. Congratulations for your field work, Ben. She's excited about the results. Audrey is one of Marianne's team members. So.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that.
Okay, again, calling for questions. We have a big audience here today, and I know lots of you are fish people, so I'm sure there must be questions out there. I will just continue to prod you all. I'm not seeing any here. So going once, going twice.
We have one.
I do see a hand is raised here. Whose is it? Oh, there, Mike Rennie. There, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead.
Oh, hey. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Fantastic. So maybe I missed it, Ben, but I was curious, what are the dimensions on the egg mats that you used for the corygonids or for the whitefish?
Yeah, they're 20 by 40 centimeters.
20 by 40. Okay. And again, those were placed based on sort of the predictions from the hydrodynamic model.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Okay. I'm curious, do you know, like you said, I mean, obviously relative, it's a totally different sampling method from the walleye, but do you get a sense of like the numbers that you're getting back on those egg mats? Is that comparable to where you might see from where they would be deployed in other environments or for other folks that have tried to do this for whitefish? Have they tried to do this for whitefish? Yeah.
So there's not a ton that have
Yeah.
done this for whitefish. But one thing I've noticed so far is just looking at like lake survey data of walleye and whitefish in Rainy Lake. So there's just more walleyes than whitefish, by a factor of
Yeah.
about tenfold. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of explains the discrepancy between the numbers of eggs we got for walleyes and whitefish.
Well, and it's different sampling methods too. So,
Right.
but yeah, no, it's interesting. That's cool. Maybe one last follow-up, just because why not? Um, any, so I guess this is sort of 1 year of egg sampling and presumably gives you some kind of ground truthing for the hydrodynamic models. I'm curious if there's plans to sort of take the hydrodynamic modeling and maybe compare that to year class strength in the fishery. Like if you guys are looking at fisheries independent monitoring surveys, like either through the data that's collected through MNR or whatever you guys are doing stateside, you know, depending on the age at which these fishes are recruited to that sampling gear, I wonder if you could sort of ground truth like a good year for walleye versus a bad year to those recruitment strengths.
So I can take this one, Ben. So in the past, we did use such data. So we were comparing population data from different agencies. So I can identify, let's for example, 2000 was a year where I have tons of suitable habitat for spawning. And I'm looking at the 2005 population survey, and I will look, okay, do I have a peak in the 5 years of
To
wildlife,
age
for
lives,
example?
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's you can it, but at the same time, it's a correlation. So it's not because you're not seeing it that the model is not good. You may have a big storm the year after and you lose all your young of the year, but it's an indication. If you see the same tendency several times, you're kind of okay, my model is going in the good the good way.
Well, sure. Or the bottleneck on recruitment is not in egg production,
And
right? It's somewhere
yeah,
further after. Yeah. But it does sound like maybe there was some correlations there in terms of because I mean you're looking at just sort of that 1 year, but like people have been catching fish on
yeah, but I've
lakes
given an
for
example for 2000,
yeah,
but
yeah.
we have more than a year, so we were able to make those links. I think the
Oh,
missing
cool.
piece maybe it's connectivity between those stages.
Right.
So if we can have a model also for larva or for young of the year and see if we have a connectivity through
Sure.
time with those two models, but we are not there yet.
No, that's cool. That's interesting. Thanks.
Phil, I think you want to jump in here, right?
Yeah, I was just going to respond. I think one thing to keep in mind about the model that we're working with here and the work that Ben's doing, it is more of a presence absence thing,
Sure.
and kind of like you referenced. I don't really think that our limitation in these systems is spawning habitat. Being in the temperate areas and the colder water that we have, I'd say year class strength is probably more often defined by the water temperatures and the conditions post spawn
Sure.
and through that whole first summer for that matter, just based on a lot of the work that we've done on these bigger systems.
Yeah, no, I mean, that would square too with some of the work that I've seen from like Yingming Zhao on Lake Erie too, like thinking about, it's sort of those where the larvae get pushed around by the wind in that first year and where they end up in the basin sort of thing seems to be pretty strongly correlated with what's coming out. So that's interesting stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. I knew that it would just take a few minutes for all of you to come forward with all your questions, and we have a whole bunch now. Okay, so we're going to start with Will in the chat. How did Cisco egg abundance track with water temperature? Is it similar to whitefish?
So I'm still working through a lot of that data, but from what I've seen so far, yeah, it's very similar to whitefish. We sampled whitefish eggs first, and I believe it was the next day we were out, we started seeing those smaller Cisco eggs.
Okay, great, thanks. Audrey asked a question that was actually very pertinent to what Phil was just talking about. Do we know if the water levels have been lowered much this fall before you sampled for the lake whitefish eggs? Had the winter drawdown practices started yet? And can you recall the depth range at which you sampled lake whitefish eggs?
So I'm not sure if the water had been lowered before I started sampling.
It did. It lowered throughout the whole time you were sampling in the fall
Okay.
period, Ben.
Because yeah, it was a pretty dry fall, and I think we commented on every time we were in the field just how low the water was. And then the depth range that we sampled lake whitefish at, we got the most around 9 feet, and then as deep as 11.2 and as shallow as 7.5 feet.
Okay, thanks. In the Q&A, Paul Anderson is asking, can the model be used to predict future conditions and threats to the fishery? That's probably a Marianne question.
Not as a state right now. So we can, yes, we can. We are doing such thing in other basin, for example, to evaluate different climate change scenario, or let's say we want to implement a structure or something like that. We can use a similar model to evaluate those. Right now, if we want to do this for rainy Namakan, we will need to maybe in such scenario to fix the critical period for every year, because it's hard to predict the next temperature next spring. But we can trick it to do some evaluation. Yes, it's possible.
Okay. Jesse Anderson is asking, have you explored using eDNA water sampling to supplement your work? The US EPA has explored this for understanding fish populations.
I'm sorry, I don't know that abbreviation. Maybe I'm lost in translation, but can you repeat your question?
eDNA. I'm not familiar with the use of eDNA either, Jesse. Maybe I'll
I can
you. Or
I can
Phil,
kind of
you can answer, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I think based on the fact that we know that there's quite a bit of presence of these species in these systems, I think it would be tough for the sensitivity of the eDNA to actually be able to document spawning activity. I think right now, validating this model and through the various water levels and temperature ranges that we're doing, I think that I don't know that having eDNA for presence of the species, and assuming that we would not be able to use it for abundance, I don't know that it would add a lot to the model itself.
Okay, so now I understand. So we have done that for some modeling, but with the Asian carp. So we have used similar habitat model, and we have linked it with when we found environmental DNA for Asian carp, but we didn't use it for spawning habitat model yet. But I think yeah it can be useful.
So environmental DNA would just be detecting presence or absence.
Yeah,
it would be validating presence.
Yeah, we can use
species.
It when but for example, species at risk and stuff like that. When you have a hard time having observation data, can help you validate a model. But I don't think it will. I don't think we need it in this specific project.
Gotcha.
And it's very sensitive as well. It's very sensitive as well.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of like a forensic tool. That's cool. Karen Cedarwell has a question for us. Have you reached out to local knowledge holders with long-term fisheries lake knowledge, such as Indigenous harvesters, commercial fishermen, or experienced guides to use in your study, especially to ID sites to sample and to get data to adjust model parameters?
Go ahead, Ben, but go ahead.
So for this field season, we did not, but that is something I'm really interested in for next fall for whitefish sampling. I think that will help a lot.
And again, so we received the news a couple weeks ago that we will pursue our work another year. So that's what we wanna go. So contact other NGO, other communities to present the model, not just to present it to the IGC and to the board that manage the water level, but to people living around the basin and see if they can implement knowledge in the modeling. Yeah, so yeah, we received the news that we will continue to work on it.
Yeah, and I mean, your original model was built on data that you did collect from local fishers and their like anecdotal personal records, but you want more, like the more the better. Yeah.
And I just want to say, so for us, for the modeler perspective, for me, having a diary like Mr. Bushnell or having field work, it's gold. Both of those information are gold for me. So I'm happy with both approach.
That's great. I don't see any further questions here. Just give it another moment. Ryan, yes, I was going to just turn to you and see if there was anything you wanted to add, because you're the one panelist we haven't heard from yet. So
Sure.
go ahead.
Anyway, great job, everybody. That's fantastic. I just wanted to hear from either Ben or Marianne about spatially how we're going to approach this next year, because I think at least the audience isn't aware of that. But since we had a limited data set feeding the models coming into this, we designed something that was logistically feasible, and the weather helped push the limits of that greatly. I feel bad for the crew having to go out for so long this fall. But anyway, they're going to cover some additional area next year. So just thought it might be good to mention that to the audience quickly. So thanks.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm gonna begin working on pretty soon here is my site selection for next year. I would like to either push further north or further west than we did this year in Canada, and then in Minnesota, we probably have to push further west than we did this year. There's been some discussions on sampling in Stanchcoming Bay and getting the indigenous community involved up there, because that's on their land. But yeah, site selection is going to be one of the big things I'm going to be focusing on over the next month or so here.
And with that, do you have permits already, or you do the permits after you select the sites?
I don't have permits yet.
Okay.
But yeah, I believe I'd have to select the sites first and then get the permit.
Yeah. Yeah, for those of you watching, it's complicated doing work in this international context to be able to cross the border and do sampling and collection and everything. Everyone needs to get permits from all the various agencies to do it. So these are big multi-party collaborations to make these projects work. So it sounds pretty straightforward when Ben's presenting it, but there was a lot of logistical effort that went into this to bring it to that stage where he could go out in the field and collect these samples. Great. Andrew, I haven't heard any. Yeah, go ahead, Marianne.
But I just hope also we will have the time, since he has a first season, we can, match it with some of our simulation and maybe seeing where we are missing information to validate or improve the model.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew, I want to give you a chance to join us here if you have anything you wanted to add.
This was Ben's first presentation on his research, and I'm just really proud of what you did there, Ben. So nice work. And I also wanted to say thank you to both the DNR agencies here that were helping with the field sampling. Now this fall was really challenging for you all, so thank you so much. And I was really happy with how many eggs were captured for the walleye, and I was just thrilled that they were capturing any for the whitefish. So that was really, really awesome work, and just looking forward to the next phase where we can start to get some of the outputs from 2024 from that model and then compare them to where we got eggs and where we didn't. And looking forward to next year. So thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, I don't see any further questions, so I can probably wrap this up. This is our last webinar of the year. We will resume the Ask an Expert series again in 2025, probably not until the fall. The fall seems to be a better time to catch people. Most people are done with the field work, aside from you, Ben. So watch for the Ask an Expert series to come back next year. If you have suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, please get in touch with me. It's Tika Newton at lowwsf.com. Pretty easy to find. Yeah, and send ideas my way. If there is a topic you'd like us to cover or people you'd like us to talk to, I'm happy to entertain suggestions anytime. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.